This is The Bandwagon, a podcast about baseball and the important, if incremental, value of change. I'm Hannah Kaiser, a baseball writer at Yahoo Sports, joined as always by Zach Kreiser, also a baseball writer at Yahoo Sports. On today's episode, we will talk about catchers not catching, Tungsten Armo Doyle, and all the new rules that have played a starring role so far this baseball season. And then later, we'll be joined by Baseball Prospectus editor-in-chief Craig Goldstein to bandwagon umpires, so he's going to have a tall task ahead of him. Before we get to any of that, I need to address the most important baseball news of the week. Juan Soto stood next to a fish tank for a count. This is thanks to Alden Gonzalez of ESPN, who tweeted out, it was the Padres-Dodgers were Sunday Night Baseball, of course. What a fantastic matchup. Why not make that the Sunday night game? But the most important, and it was a great game. It went to extra innings. The famous guys did cool, famous things. There were some very unimpressive outfield displays, but there were also some very impressive power displays. But most importantly, Alden tweeted out that the Padres gave away a dog calendar for today's game. Every month features a picture of a player and his dogs, except August. Juan Soto, who has pet allergies, instead went to a nearby pet store and took his in front of a fish tank. Do you want to describe for our listeners, if they have not seen, the photo itself? Because you think, that sounds funny. He's with the fish instead of with the dog. No, it is so much weirder than you are envisioning.
It is. So, first of all, Juan Soto is in full uniform. It's like right after spring training picture day, they said, get in the van, we're taking you to PetSmart. And then
Excuse me, Petco.
I'm sorry. Is there a huge difference? Are they not owned by the same people? Anyway.
I assume if one of them sponsors your ballpark, there is.
That's true. So at Petco, they not the stadium, the actual Petco, he is just... It looks like he was in the store for roughly 15 seconds. He walked up to the fish tank. The fish are not even well framed in this photo. It's like he's just kind of standing next to it. You can see the price tags. It's just some random fish display. They take a picture of him, and that's it. It's in the calendar. Famously, there are 12 months in a year, and more than 12 people on a baseball team. And I would bet there are more than 12 San Diego Padres who have a pet or at least could pose with a pet. Look, your pet is in the background. But this is a visual medium. Hannah's cat is walking through the video frame. So they could have found another player with a pet, but clearly they just really wanted Juan Soto in there. So they took 10 seconds and put him in front of a fish tank.
Even if your decisions tree starts with, we got to get Juan Soto, which fair. He's a very famous baseball player. There are so many other ways this could have gone. First of all, if they took more than one photo, I would be surprised. Because if this was the best of even two, that's shocking. You mentioned there's not really, it doesn't really highlight the fish. It doesn't even really highlight the fish tank based on just sort of, height. The centered along with Juan Soto is the portion of the fish tank wall at Petco that is between the tanks that features a little description of each of the fish and the price for each of the fish. The fish themselves are not even the highlight. And maybe Juan Soto doesn't have a dog because he's allergic to dogs, and I guess he doesn't even have a cat. But again, there are so many other ways he could. If he were holding like a classic goldfish bowl with one little goldfish in it, just under his arm, and they just snapped a portrait of him, that would be silly and they would be doing a thing, but it would be good. And I don't know.
It would be creative. It would be a creative solution.
Yeah. Let him pose with a non-fluffy pet. There are non-fluffy pets. He doesn't have pet allergies. He has, I assume,
dander
allergies. He could hold a hermit crab. He could hold a lizard. He could hold a snake, and that would be very cool. But a chinchilla, do they have dander? Probably.
Yeah, I would assume they do. They have hair.
There are non-fluffy pets. He could be holding one of those Sphinx cats. That would be very fun. He could be with a bunch of them. Whoever the 13th most famous Padre is who showed up with his puppy that day thinking that like he was going to get to be in the calendar is like, are you kidding me? You guys went with Juan Soto in front of a fish tank, but not even really? It's very strange.
I assume there are people in like America who have not been to a pet store before for whatever reason. And they probably looked at this photo and were like, why did Juan Soto go to Walmart and stand there? Like, what does this have to do with anything?
Nothing about this photo screams fish, even.
No.
It's
just big box store.
Again, as confident as I am that they didn't take even a second photo because of the quality and composition of this photo, also because of the quality and composition of the photo, I feel quite confident that they did not give the Petco a heads up. Like, they didn't rent it out for this. There are other shoppers there purchasing like cat litter and dog treats who are like, wait, is that Juan Soto? And it is. And you can tell it's him because he's wearing his full Juan Soto Padres uniform. I would like a copy of this calendar if that's possible. So just putting that out there.
Make some calls.
Okay. There's really, I didn't think that hard about it, but I don't think there is a good way to transition from that to the Cardinals-Wilson Contreras situation. This is a pretty complicated one, and it's been in the news already for actually only a couple days, and it already seems like we've gone through several cycles. But just a really, really quick recap. On Saturday, news broke. Katie Wu of The Athletic did a lot of the reporting. I didn't totally see if that's like the very, very first time it broke, but news broke that the Cardinals were considering playing Willson Contreras in the outfield and DHing him. The most important part there is that he would not be catching. At the time, Ali Marmal, the manager, said, we've had a lot of conversation about it. Notably, the Cardinals already have a very crowded outfield. Tyler O'Neill currently on the 15-day IL, but they have Dylan Carlson, Lars Nootbaar, Alec Burleson, Juan Yepes. They don't have Jordan Walker because they optioned him to AAA, their top prospect who debuted on opening day. On Sunday, they said, never mind, he will not be playing the outfield. That came from President of Baseball Operations John Mozeliak to The Athletic in a phone call. Apparently, Willson Contreras had approached the Cardinals management after a loss on Saturday to say that he understood he would not be catching, but he would rather focus on learning to catch and DHing and not playing the outfield. So they said, okay, fine, you will DH and learn to catch. Mo said in that interview with The Athletic, I do think the nuances of the catching side, we haven't had to spend a whole lot of energy thinking about them because of what Yadi did. That would be Yadier Molina, their catcher for 20 years, future Hall of Famer, most likely. It'll be an interesting debate, perhaps one that will feature references to this week.
This episode. Yeah.
Yeah. And Mo also said some of the things we expect, some of the things about the game we become accustomed to, I think that's Willson Contreras, realizes it's going to require more preparation. Now, the question is, can that happen? I guess we'll have to find out. Oh, okay. Not a lot of confidence.
They are taking a similar tact here to, you mentioned Jordan Walker, who was a top prospect who came up through the minors playing third base. And when he made it to the majors, they put him in the outfield and it didn't go well. But we're talking about like this, he was a 21-year-old who had played like less than 20 games in the outfield. Willson Contreras has played 650 games in the majors at catcher, some of them in the World Series. Like, he is not new to the position or the concept. He's apparently just new to whatever the Cardinals thought was going to happen, which, I have not heard anyone articulate anything that isn't just he's not Yadier Molina, which is not a reasonable standard.
Yeah. So then we're recording on Tuesday. Yesterday, the Cardinals won. They went back. This is important. They went back to Chicago, where Willson Contreras played all of his career prior to this year. That was going to be a little bit tricky for him already. They didn't make it easier on him by moving him out of his primary position right before that. They went back to Chicago. He got cheered and booed. He had a great game at the plate. He had 2 hits, 2 RBIs. When he got booed after he got the hit, he did a little like, what is this? He was like, more,
I think it's
more
like a
boos.
bring it on.
Yeah, bring it on.
Yeah.
Bring it on. Exactly. He responded interestingly to the crowd. So, and before the game, Adam Wainwright and Jack Flaherty, 2 Cardinals pitchers, sort of defended Contreras, or rather they said, like, since this has all come out, and oh my gosh, I can't believe you guys are so mean about the implication that Willson Contreras is a bad catcher, we now have had to have a meeting in which we tell him, like, we don't hate you. That actually, they were like, Wainwright said that meeting was really big about the fact that they had a meeting with Willson Contreras to tell him that they don't hate him. There's so many ways that this is weird. You in particular wrote a story about looking at all the other ways. We haven't said this part yet. Why are they doing this? Because they're bad. The Cardinals are bad. They're off to a terrible start.
Yes.
The worst team in the NL. So you looked at a lot of the ways that they could have fixed some of their problems or addressed this specific problem, I guess, sort of before we got to this point. You want to walk us through some of the points you made in your article?
Yeah, I think the thing to remember is they signed him. They went out of their way to do a thing they don't usually do, which is sign free agents instead of trading. They signed Willson Contreras for $87.5 million to be the new catcher. So, it was pretty drastic action to go from he's the new catcher to he is not a catcher in less than 2 months of baseball. And it seems like they did not try a lot of things that other teams seemingly would try if they were having some, the communication issues with the pitchers, or they don't think the catcher is game planning well enough for their pitchers. Those seem to be the issues, although they haven't like laid out specific instances. That seems to be the implication, that he's not game planning and game calling the way that the Cardinals pitchers are comfortable with or used to. So Adam Wainwright has only made one start this year. He was injured, but the rest of the starting rotation, who has been pitching all year, they've all been in the majors for at least 5 years. They are not young pitchers. And a lot pitchers...
Well, Adam Wainwright, also not a young pitcher. Famously.
Well, yes, but
famously not a young pitcher.
I'm not claiming that Adam Wainwright was doing this. He has not pitched, but he's very, very much not a young pitcher. But Jack Flaherty, Miles Mikolas, Steven Matz, Jordan Montgomery. Jordan Montgomery, honestly, been fine. No issues with Jordan Montgomery. He does not seem to have an issue. But the rest of them have been terrible, and they have not apparently tried just, calling their own pitches with PitchCom, which is a thing some guys are doing of their own volition this year, not because they don't like their catcher. They didn't apparently think it was worthwhile to just, maybe mix in Willson Contreras less while he gets up to speed. It's just a really strange overall messaging, because this is not how you break in a catcher. Yeah. The whole thing is that they don't like how he's working with the pitchers, so the solution is to have him not work with the pitchers? That's the idea?
Right. So I ran this through the timeline of what we know, what's public, what's been reported. Let's talk about some of the things that are probably, we can infer, you touched on this, but has not been reported. So the pitching is the pitching is what we are looking at to determine what's going wrong in this pitching-catching relationship. Nobody expected the Cardinals pitching to be very good. This was a major concern in the offseason. It was a major concern coming into the season. It was a pretty major concern last year. In fact, that's why they got Jordan Montgomery. They needed more pitching. So Mike Petriello had an interesting Twitter thread about this. I'm not sure how much the numbers have changed since then, but sort of looking at the fact that a lot of this is being blamed on Willson Contreras, the catcher, but that the pitching is actually just as bad as in some ways it was expected to be based on projections. But okay, it's the thing that we sort of, the behind the scenes, the part they're not saying, it seems like perhaps some pitchers complained that they didn't like something Contreras was doing, whether that was the game calling itself or they didn't like his way of working with the pitchers. He wasn't giving them confidence behind the plate because he wasn't Yadier Molina. To backdate this a little, the absence of Yadier Molina is a huge deal. That's why he got a whole retirement tour. That retirement tour notably came because he told them he would be retiring, and they had a lot of time to think about how they might want to replace him. What I don't understand is why, if you are going from Yadier Molina to anyone else, whether that's Willson Contreras or Andrew Kisner, the Cardinals' previous backup catcher who's now going to be catching the bulk of the games, the transition is something that is not the incoming catcher's responsibility, because the standard has been set by someone who is not them, and the team wants to make that transition as smooth as possible. So the team, whether that's manager Ollie Marmol, president of baseball operations John Mozeliak, somewhere in between, they should have spent so much of 2022 thinking about how you were going to make that transition. And they should have spent even more of this past offseason thinking about how they were going to make that transition. And ostensibly they did. The sort of question of who's going to follow Yadier Molina was a big question for the Cardinals offseason. And when they met with Willson Contreras, I assume they were thinking, well, this guy has some questions to his defense. The Cubs didn't want to re-sign him. He was not traded at the deadline last year, or it seemed like he might be. A lot of this was sort of attributed to the question marks around his defense. And then they met with him, went into that meeting, knowing all those things. People have pointed out many times, coming from a division rival, they've seen Willson Contreras a lot. And they've said this sort of several times, both in this week of news cycle scandal and also previously. They went to this meeting with Willson Contreras. Oh, he blew them away with his enthusiasm to follow in the footsteps of Yadi, to take on this challenge. Then in spring training, he skipped the WBC to spend more time working with the pitchers. So I think from a purely job management perspective, it's like, if someone, if you're hiring, Willson Contreras is not young, but let's say you're hiring someone young, you're concerned they don't have the necessary skill set for whatever the job is, but then you meet with them and you really love their energy and their enthusiasm for the job, and you see in them a willingness to learn, and you evaluate them as someone who has the capacity to learn, which in and of itself may have been a questionable evaluation of someone who, again, is not actually that young. But whatever. You say, we're going to take a chance on this guy. He hasn't proven these skills in the past, but we like what he said. We like the potential. That's what spring training is for. To turn whatever it was that Willson Contreras sold them on, the potential he had to become a successor to Yadier Molina. They had all of spring training, and even before spring training, they could have sent him a handbook that of someone wrote down everything Yadier Molina ever said. Ask every pitcher in your organization who's ever worked with Yadier Molina. Send him every article that's ever been written about Yadi. Send him every footage of him, secretly tape him in his pitchers meetings the last week of the season. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I feel like
get him
the
up
solution,
to speed.
The solution was also to get the pitchers ready for this.
Yes.
Or what everyone thought they might do this offseason, get some new pitchers who are actually good.
Yes.
That would have helped, but they did not do that.
The in some ways, the ingredients for this to happen were there. They signed a defensively mediocre to below mediocre catcher whose value is in his bat, and he's been great. He's been one of their best hitters. And they signed him to replace a defensive wizard who everyone says is like the backbone of the club. Okay, yeah, you have the ingredients for that transition being rough. You gave yourself those ingredients. Someone's job is to make sure the transition goes smoothly. And this is the last thing I'll say about this, which is yesterday in particular. So the Cardinals won the game, and they knew at that point everyone had been mad. This had sort of blown up over the weekend and into Monday. And Ollie Marmol gave a lot of quotes about kind of, he said, what's out there and then what's really happening behind closed doors couldn't be more different than how we feel internally about our processing moving forward. He sort of said, like, we see how this is playing out. That's why we had this meeting. We didn't want Willson Contreras to feel, you are what you seem to be. Like the job of the people who are not Willson Contreras, the job of anyone who's not on the field as a player, is to make sure these kinds of things get worked out smoothly and that these kinds of things don't get blamed on the players. You referenced in your story the fact that this is not the first time this year, which is not that old of a baseball season, that the Cardinals, again, a bad team, off to a very difficult start, somewhat unexpectedly, have attempted to make one player the focal point of their struggles. And if you are not a player, your number one job should be preventing that from happening. And so they're failing at that, regardless of whether or not, sure, they have some kind of secret plan. He's got to learn the secret sauce to learn to catch that they can't even tell us about or whatever. But don't tell us that we are wrong for critiquing what has come out if our critique is, seems like it shouldn't have come out like this? Okay. Do you want to play a game?
Let's play a game.
Okay. We're going to play a quick game. This game is called Actually Angels or Tungsten Arm O'Doyle.
Okay.
It consists of me telling you about some Angels games, and then you tell me, was that an actual Angels game? Or is this a fake Angels game instance of the Tungsten Arm O'Doyle paradigm?
Okay.
You feel like you get it?
I understand the game.
You just have to say actual Angels.
Angels or Tungsten Arm?
Tungsten Arm O'Doyle.
Okay.
Okay. All right. This is based on the fact, by the way, this is inspired by Shohei Ohtani, recently became what? I didn't write this part down, but I think I remember. What? The first guy, the only guy other than Babe Ruth to have 500 strikeouts and 100 home runs, something like that. It's cool.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Good for Ohtani. Okay. Now to the game. First instance. Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani combine for 9 RBIs, and Ohtani strikes out 10 as the Angels fall 9-12 to the Blue Jays. Actual Angels or Tungsten Arm O'Doyle?
I think that's Tungsten Arm.
It is Tungsten Arm. Good job. Okay, I didn't put these in like a good order, so I'm going to have to like jump around. On opening day, Ohtani struck out 10 in 6 shutout innings. Just the 26th time since 1901 that the opening day starter has struck out at least 10 and allowed no runs. It is, however, the first time that his team lost that game. Actual Angels or Tungsten Arm O'Doyle?
That sounds Actual Angels.
That is Actual Angels. That was March 30th, 2023. They lost 2-1 to the A's.
And then Anthony Rendon tried to fight a fan.
Yeah.
Still remember it for right now. So,
All right. Mike Trout has 3 hits, including 2 home runs and 5 RBIs, while Shohei Ohtani has 3 hits and 2 stolen bases, and the Angels lose 7-5. Actual Angels or Tungsten Arm O'Doyle?
I'll go Actual Angels.
That was Actual Angels. April 29th, 2023 versus the Brewers. All right. Shohei Ohtani goes 4 for 5 with a triple and a home run and 4 RBIs. Angels lose 11-7. Actual Angels, Tungsten Arm O'Doyle.
Actual Angels.
Yes, it was. Wow, you're very good at this. That was August 17th, 2022 versus the Mariners. Okay. Mike Trout records his 300th career home run on the same night that Ohtani records his 400th career strikeout in the same game as the Angels lose 3-2 to the Rangers. Actual Angels, Tungsten Arm O'Doyle.
I'll go Tungsten Arm.
That is Tungsten Arm. Why are you so good at this?
I feel like I would have remembered those milestones happening at the same time.
It was tricky to come up with stuff that would be like, you wouldn't notice that this never actually happened. Okay. Shohei Ohtani hits 2 3-run home runs in a career-high 8 RBI night, the most ever for a Japanese-born player. And the Angels lose 12-11, having never held the lead. Actual Angels or Tungsten Arm O'Doyle?
Oh, that might be Actual Angels.
That was. Damn it, you're so good at this. June 21st, 2022 versus Kansas City. All right. Shohei Ohtani becomes the all-time leader for MLB home runs hit by a Japanese-born player in the same game that he throws 7 scoreless innings, and the Angels lose 3-1 to the Astros. Actual Angels or Tungsten Arm O'Doyle?
Tungsten Arm.
That is Tungsten Arm O'Doyle. However, he did pass Ichiro Suzuki for the second most home runs ever by a Japanese-born player on the same day.
He's still behind Hideki Matsui, I presume.
Yes, he is. And actually, they won that game where he did that, so it wasn't a Tungsten Arm O'Doyle. Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout go back-to-back twice as the Angels fall 8-5 to the Rays.
Tungsten Arm.
That is Tungsten Arm. I think you're going like 100.
Going sweeping. Sweeping.
You're sweeping Tungsten Arm. All right. Mike Trout homered in his 4th consecutive game, matching his career record for consecutive games with a home run and tying Shohei Ohtani for the team lead with 32 home runs. Later in that same game, Ohtani homers to retake the lead with his 33rd homer. That was the 8th time in the year they'd homered in the same game, and the Angels lost 5-4.
Actual Angels.
That was actual Angels. So that one was too detailed to be fake, but I enjoyed it and I had to include it. Shohei Ohtani led the Angels in plate appearances and innings pitched last year, and the Angels finished 73rd and 89 and missed the postseason. Actual Angels or Tungsten Armo Doyle?
I feel like there's like one bit of this that is off, but I'll say actual Angels.
It is actual Angels. That was the most surprising. Did you realize that? I mean, you did because you got this right.
I thought he might have not led them in plate appearances or whatever.
Plate appearances and innings pitched. This man's incredible. Yeah. Okay. Mike Trout hit a home run 441 feet, and Shohei Ohtani was 2 for 4, while the rest of the team went hitless in a 4-3 loss. Actual Angels or Tungsten Armo Doyle?
Actual Angels.
Yes, it was. April 7th, 2023 versus the Blue Jays. That is our game. Producer John, how did Zach do? I don't think he got any of them wrong. I think you were 100%. Maybe one wrong? Not more than one wrong.
I don't think I missed anything.
Okay. Either I am not as good, 11 for 11. Either I am not as good at making up fake Tungsten Armo Doyle situations, or you are very attuned to Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout's feats of greatness in the face of futility. Okay. Now we're going to take a quick break and come back with a dive into baseball's new rules now that we've started to get used to them, like, a little bit more than a month in. Okay, we are back and we are going to talk about the new rules. I am not sure if we're tired of talking about the new rules, or if, more importantly, people are tired of listening to people talk about the new rules. But you made the compelling argument that before people get totally tired of this, we should check in on the effects, because everybody was talking about the effects like the first week of the season when there had not been a meaningful sample size of games, and now there's been a more meaningful sample size of games. And so we're going to talk about there's been, in fact, 518 games, according to Baseball Reference. So we're going to talk about the effect that the rules are having, the effects that the rules are not having, and what kind of baseball this feels like. This was something you wanted to talk about, so you tell me what you found the most interesting in kind of looking into what the rules were doing to baseball.
I think the thing I wanted to talk about is when we heard about all the rule changes and everyone kind of got their heads around the idea of pitch timer, pickoff limits, no shifts, limited infield shifts, and, just the ripple effects that would come from that. There seemed to be an idea of, it's going to be very different. It's going to look like, especially when we saw a bunch of stolen bases in the first week or so, everyone's like, we're going back to the 80s. And I don't think that has happened. I think the only way in which we've gone back to the 80s is the length of the game. We have taken 20-something. We can talk about exactly what year, but recent baseball, we have taken that and just compressed it so it all happens in 2 hours and 30 minutes, 2 hours, 45 minutes, something in there. And I guess I'm wondering if you think that is a good outcome, or if you were hoping for more actual changes in the aesthetic of the game.
Okay. Yes and yes is my short answer. Yeah, the game time, the average time of game this year is 2 hours, 39 minutes. For a 9-inning game, it's 2 minutes shorter. It's 2 hours, 37 minutes. We don't have a lot of extra innings games because of the runner on second rule, or deep, long extra innings games. Last year, game time average was 3:06. It maybe peaked. I didn't go back far enough, but probably peaked in 2021 at 3:11. So it's the pitch clock. Okay. I feel like we didn't mean to steal this idea from Ben Lindbergh over at The Ringer, who ended up writing about a very similar thing. And so now all I'm thinking about are the quotes that Major League Baseball executive Morgan Sword gave him. But the pitch clock, it's hard for it to not be effective, and it is very effective, and people love it, and they should, and it is one of those, like, why not do this sooner? It seems so simple, and apparently it is. You want the game to be shorter, you put a clock on it, and it is. So, okay, your question about, like, is it better to keep to push everything into a smaller time frame. Yeah, totally, because that addresses the whole pace of play issue. The runs per game are up compared to the last 2 years. So it's the same, if not more, amount of offense and slightly less time. That's good. Less downtime. But you're right. Everything else, not actually that much change. The current league-wide batting average is 248, which is higher than it's been the last 3 seasons, but like not a huge difference. Even BABIP, batting average on balls in play, 298, is exactly the 2019 levels. And you mentioned the stolen bases. Again, at the beginning of the year, everybody was like, stolen bases, they're off the charts. And in fact, when other people did this kind of what are the rules doing to baseball thing, on April 17th, when Sports Illustrated did that, they wrote about the new rules. Stolen base success rate was 83%. As of this morning, I checked, it's 78.6%. So it's much closer to what it was last year, which was 75% than what it was at the beginning of the year. So yeah, things are kind of normalizing. There are more stolen base attempts, though. There's 0.71 per team per game, which is the highest it's been since 1996.
That's stolen bases, not attempts. That is
stolen
bases.
Okay, that is stolen bases. Yeah, so stolen bases themselves are up, but the stolen base success rate is not as notably up as it was at the first few weeks of play with these new rules. So I think none of the new rules are having terrible unintended bad effects, and they're all doing a little of what we want. Most notably, again, pushing all that action into a slightly smaller time frame, and that is great. But you're right; they're not really actually changing the style of play.
Right. I think what I've taken away from this is mostly that, aside from the pitch timer, which is a seismic change that is just, keeping the game moving along, the other changes tell me it's really hard to actually change baseball from what it is at the moment. It's not that, if you had tried to change baseball in the early 2000s when it was just home run ball and offense was off the charts, the league batting average was like 270 then, and now it's 248. I think you would have had equally non-important changes. Like it wouldn't have moved the needle a ton then either, I don't think. And I think especially right now when teams are so attuned to the optimal strategy of everything they're doing and how to go about winning games the best ways, you're not going to budge them off that spot that much. They're going to just, if you move the spot 3 inches, they're just going to find the new spot. That's kind of how baseball works now. I think there are certainly things you could do that would change the game more, but I think this was a comfortable level that both had one really big thing and a lot of smaller things that, for the most part, I think people are just recognizing is okay. It's okay. Change was fine, and it didn't alter the sport entirely. It just tweaked a few things. And honestly, what I think MLB should take from this is these levels of, you don't want to do the pitch clock level change every year, but I think we've seen the NBA, we've seen the NFL do more incremental changes or have points of emphasis, I guess the NFL often calls it, pretty regularly. And I think baseball should take away from this that maybe we can try things like this often. It doesn't have to be this once in a generation swing for the fences where you have to get everyone on board for this one big thing. I think they can try more things. Hard to say exactly what those things will be. They could do more positioning limitations to encourage more athletic defense and more hits. They could try limiting shifts in the outfield, for instance. But I think it's kind of a license to try a little bit more because it's not changing the face of the sport entirely.
Yeah, the Ben Lindbergh article that I referenced specifically talks to Morgan Sword about the fact that strikeouts are not down. That this idea that one of the biggest, most intractable problems in baseball has been the ever increase of strikeout rate, because not letting guys put the ball in play is a very good way to prevent any kind of offense against you. And that's true. This year's strikeout rate is 22.7%. Last year was 22.4%. It did peak a little. It peaked in 2020 or more reasonably in 2021 at like 23%. The balls in play, which is something that Baseball Reference tracked, I thought this was interesting. So balls in play is at bats minus strikeouts minus home runs plus sac fly are the third lowest ever, behind just 2020 and 2021 at 24.24 balls in play per game. That's just like the number of
things that happen.
Things that happen in a game. That needs to go up. That needs to go up. That's like, it is actually kind of crazy if you think about how long games used to be. And even if you think about how long games are now, that you're like, really? Like fewer than 25 times does something happen that involves like people other
Fielders.
than the pitcher and the hitter. The rate of 3 true outcomes this year, that's the home runs, strikeouts, walks. That's the thing that we want to go down. The rate of 3 true outcomes. 3 true outcomes is the non-action baseball. This year it's at 34.7% of plate appearances. That's like the number one biggest problem in baseball. And it's because pitchers are too good. So at the start of the season, I wrote about, in my sort of version of like, look at these new rules, wrote about the sort of the broader imbalance of pitching versus hitting and how pitchers, they're constantly getting further and further ahead of hitters. And I don't know that these new rules do anything to target that. I think MLB thought they were doing that with the pitch clocks. Oh, the pitchers are going to have to conserve energy. They're not going to be able to throw as hard because they're going to have to work deeper, especially in conjunction with the pitcher limits on rosters, max out at 13, something that teams were very resistant to and critical of for the first several instances of MLB attempting to implement that. I worry that you cannot actually fix the style of baseball by making it more onerous for pitchers. Because, and this is something that I've talked about, we talked about this in the sticky stuff, we talked about this ideology, I guess, in our sticky stuff conversation. Because pitchers do not move en masse as a whole. They don't make themselves a little worse across the board because they know the other guy's also going to have to conserve energy. Like, I don't actually know that you can make pitching onerous enough just through roster limits or pitch clocks or even maybe lowering the mound or changing that kind of stuff.
Moving I don't think back.
I don't think you can make pitching onerous enough for teams to not value, prioritize, coach towards getting strikeouts through whatever means possible, whether that involves constantly optioning guys to the minors and having an ever-rotating cast of relievers, whether that means higher risk or rate of injury, which is something we should imply, hasn't necessarily happened, hasn't been proven, all that stuff. But you know what I'm saying? That like the incentive to get strikeouts is just so great. And the incentive to find, coach, create, put guys in the position to get those strikeouts is so great. And the monetary compensation for getting those strikeouts is so great that I don't think like that it, in some ways I don't enjoy rule changes that are just designed to make it harder for pitchers to do something that they are definitely still trying to do. I think you have to just implement in like almost more radical change that changes the incentive structure around baseball. One of the things that we have talked about, because it hasn't been a new rule change and it deserves more than its own episode, is the whole RoboZone thing. I do actually think that one of the benefits of the strike zone, automated strike zone, which I have my own concerns about, but one of the benefits would be the ability to control the strike zone itself with like a across the league with like
a machine.
one turn of the dial. Like if you want there to be fewer strikeouts, you can just turn down the strike zone, make it smaller. I do think you're going to get more walks that way, but like whatever.
Which are not more interesting necessarily.
Which are not more interesting. You know. But all of which is to just say that like and Morgan talked about this in the article with Ben, that like you can't, that strikeouts are on the rise because everything in the game from a run prevention standpoint is pointing towards that. And however much you change the circumstances, if you don't change the incentive direction, they're just going to continue to work towards it. They're going to go over whatever hurdles necessary. I do think baseball's better. I feel like we should just, before we wrap this up, do you think this is better baseball than we've had in the recent seasons?
Yeah, I think it's better for the viewer. And honestly, maybe for the players. We don't have a great sense of that in totality yet. But I think the problem with recent baseball, you can have a problem with the balls in play, but the biggest problem was just that it took too long. It was a long time between the things happening. And I count a strikeout as a thing happening. You know, we celebrate pitchers
totally
for their ability to get strikeouts. I think it is true that we need to think about where the limit is, where that becomes not entertaining. But in the current game, that is that's the pitcher's version of a home run. It just happens way more often. So that is a thing happening. And now we're getting the same amount of stuff happening in a much smaller time. And I think that is the ultimate win here, along with the fact that nothing broke. It did not break down the nature of the sport with, we're not seeing some crazy amount of stolen bases or anything. The pitch timer is not wrecking guys left and right. It seems like it's the same sport in a better TV window package, which is, I think, the best outcome. But
I think the best and worst thing about these rule changes are that if you didn't see the clock and you didn't know that these rule changes happened, you wouldn't necessarily notice anything different. And that is part of what MLB wanted. They did not want to shock people with this game looks totally different. And that is, you're right, that is good. Baseball that you would not know is different if you watched it because you already like it, but you might watch it even if you didn't like it because it takes less time. That's good.
You can see the ninth inning now. Yeah.
But while we're I can't let this topic come and go without saying I really do think, and this is not a joke, I've said this for years, I really do think if you just made giant ballparks move the fences way back, one of these, I think you gotta, my last little bit I'll say, I almost think that some of these rules are too targeted. They are trying to fix the exact thing. Oh, the balls are getting too many outs, they're going to change where the fielders can stand, and not enough stolen bases, we're going to limit the pickoff attempts, whatever. I kind of think you got to change the parameters more. That's all. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I understand. We could do a whole episode on your move the fences back take.
You know what else I think maybe? I just came across this one. We're not going to talk about it because I just had this thought while I was watching a game the other day. You know what? There's no out of the base path rule. You can run wherever you want. You just got to get to the next base. In fact, I think you can skip second if you want. I think you should just be able to. Do you think that would change? How long would it take for something weird to happen if we didn't have the base runner?
One day.
You don't think you because they're going to want to go shortest possible distance between 2 points, but would they run into the outfield and make everybody chase them around like it was a game of tag? If they could?
No. The outfield thing. That I don't think that would happen really ever. But the running from first to third thing, something weird would happen immediately.
Yeah, you should be allowed to run from first to third if you think you can make it.
I think a pitcher would just form tackle someone within the first day.
I'm pretty sure there's a rule against tackling in baseball. I don't know, not confident, but I bet there is. We'll look into that for our next episode. Okay, should we talk to Craig?
Let's talk to Craig.
Let's bring in Craig. And now we are joined by Craig Goldstein, editor-in-chief of Baseball Prospectus. You are here to bandwagon what I have been told is umpires. Take it away.
It's a little bit of I felt like a hot take, but it is something that I believe in. I'm not just trying to do content here. So my case is this. And it's been something that I think I've legitimately been bandwagoning myself, which is that I've slowly come aboard to this point of view. And it's that a lot of the things that I truly believed would be improved by kind of removing umpires from the game haven't been over time. I think replay is kind of one of the most obvious forms of this, especially kind of that pop slide into second base where someone's off the bag for a quarter of a second as they transfer their feet and the guy held the tag. And it's kind of well, sure, technically that's fine, but also like he was really safe. Like you beat the throw, you were there, like this is such a technicality. And my point of view is that umpires should be empowered in those situations to just not review that play. I think, or I guess the other way to do it is to say managers shouldn't challenge that or should ask for a challenge, and the umpires can choose to allow it or deny it, as they do when a manager loses their challenge early in a game and requests someone to review a play. We saw that happen with Scott Service recently in a Mariners game. He had it happen 2 at batters in a row after he had lost his challenge, and they did both, and he was right both times. And I think that's fine, right? That's really, that to me, that worked out really well. And I think I also am projecting forward when we're talking about the automatic ball strike system, ABS, Robo Zone, whatever you want to call it, Robo Ump. You know, sometimes there's a game that's like 15-4 and we want to hustle it along. I posted something recently in a Dodgers game. They were up, 13-4, maybe something like that. And there was a position player pitching and he was throwing 46 miles an hour and it was 3 inches above the zone and the ump called a strike. And you know what? The ump was right to call a strike. It's time to go home. It's fine, right? We don't need to do that. And the answer to that, and they're testing this, and I actually think it's where they'll settle, is that players can challenge. Mm-hmm. And in a 13-4 game, a player is probably not going to challenge that play. It's fine. Right? It wasn't a strikeout. It wasn't necessarily an out. It was just a strike, and it was fine to do. But my broader point is that, I know umpires are, they're like cops, basically, right? Like they're not the best.
Cops of baseball.
They're the cops of baseball. They're not the best. They've earned a lot of the derision that they get, and they miss stuff a lot. I actually think they're really good in general in terms of accuracy. I know there are a lot of plays, there are a lot of strikes and balls and all of that kind of stuff, and they miss some. For sure. And they miss crucial ones, for sure. But I think the aesthetics and the pace of the game are drastically improved when they're kind of in control of things. And that doesn't mean that they're above reproach. I don't think that should be the case either. I don't like that they can't be criticized after games without guys getting fined, things like that. I think they need to be willing to look at themselves. They need to be more willing to be overruled before we can trust them not to take a challenge and things like that. It would take a little bit of a culture change, but we're basically heading towards a system where like they want to assert maximum authority and also not be above reproach. And everyone just hates kind of where we're at. And I think where we're going is not going to be much better. And look, this is naive to some degree, but I think we need a scenario where like there's a little more trust and a little more willingness to say, like, if I get a call wrong, like my job's not over, I'm not the worst at it, like, which is true, right? Like that's objectively true. They get things wrong all the time and they retain their jobs. So like they should be a little more comfortable with those sorts of criticisms. And if they were and behaved that way, we could let them have a little more say over the flow of the game and certain calls. And I think it would be a lot more enjoyable in general.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the most convincing piece of bandwagoning the umpires is, when there's actually, I have a great play example from Monday night. There was a steal attempt in the Guardians-Tigers game that went hilariously awry, I guess. Yes. They threw the ball. The Guardians threw the ball to try to get Akil Baddoo out, and the ball was not originally caught by Andres Jimenez, the second baseman. It hit Baddoo in a sensitive area and bounced into Jimenez's glove, and then he tagged Baddoo. And the ump is right in the frame, just doing the biggest, hardest punch out that you've ever seen. And that play is so much more enjoyable because the call is emphatic and immediate, whereas it is not so fun if Akil Baddoo gets hit with a ball, cowers on the ground for a little bit while they review the play, and then someone goes out. Like, it's not as fun. I'm sure it wasn't fun for Akil Baddoo either way.
I don't think he was going to enjoy that regardless of what happened.
Fun for the rest of us. But those types of plays are more fun when the call comes from the umpire in a natural way, as opposed to waiting for someone to buzz in his ear, hey, this is what happened.
Okay. I think your most compelling argument about bandwagoning umpires is that they're good at their jobs, which is both the most controversial part, I think, and also, I think, the most accurate part. Like, they just are. They are good at their jobs in the sense that they are not perfect at their jobs, but no one is perfect at their job. We say that people are good at their jobs relative to the rest of the human population. Like, you're only supposed to be so good at your job that you are better than most, if not all, other people. And I believe that they are. And so they are good at their jobs. On the replay front, I kind of think that the manager challenges thing should go away entirely. Well, and umpires should just decide. They should just be like, actually, that one was really close. We'd like to take a look at it. And it should just happen automatically. Like, they should just they got the people in New York. They're looking at all the screens all the time. The people in New York who are looking at the screens should just be able to like buzz the umpires at the game and be like, hey, actually, we think you might have gotten that one wrong. Because I don't need theater around challenging plays.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's part of my case for part of my case for the umpires is that, like, I don't think most people, maybe I'm wrong, I don't think most people want that. I don't think most people want the umps in control of deciding when challenges happen or reviews happen, if you want to put it that way, because they think umpires, and look, umpires have earned this kind of perspective, won't really initiate a review to, say I was wrong.
Themselves out.
And that's right, exactly. And that's kind of the culture change that I'm talking about. But again, I think if you frame it as like, you guys are really good at your jobs, and they really are, like, objectively they are. I know it gets really rough. I know guys have bad games. Some of them are not so great. That's absolutely the case. But in general, I think they're really, really good. And I think if we kind of cultivated that a little bit, like, we get a more enjoyable product on the other end of it. And here's maybe my more controversial example. I listened to you guys talk about the Max Scherzer Rosin situation from the episode with Josh Gondelman, and like I think, like, I don't really like Phil Cousy or Cousy, but like I think he's right. Like, and like, Hannah, you talked about it at the time. Like you said, like, maybe a lot of these other guys just aren't willing to call out Max Scherzer for whatever he's doing. But like, people seem to really dislike the fact that he's been the guy to ban, like, to kick 3 guys out, and that umpires have this like nebulous threshold by which to determine what's too much rosin, what's too sticky, this kind of stuff. And I understand not liking that there's not a scientific kind of like a specific things that pitchers know and can either exceed or not. But to the point that you guys were talking about, they said, go wash off your hand. They didn't kick him out immediately. They didn't say, this is too much, now you're gone. They said, wash your hand off. And then it kind of happened again. And so they said, okay, that's enough. And I actually think umpires are pretty well positioned to be... They've been touching these guys' hands for 3 years, right? Like, it's bizarre, but like, they seem to have a good baseline to decide what's too much. Again, it's a little Potter Stewart. I know it when I see it. That's, fine. I understand we don't like that, but we can't like have a lab down on the field to decide like what's too much. So we have to trust these guys, right? And I understand no one's happy with these guys generally, but again, I think they do a pretty good job, and it's fine. And they're actually well positioned to make that call of what is or isn't too much. And I know people aren't comfortable with that, but I kind of think like maybe they should be.
Speaking of the first Supreme Court reference on the bandwagon that I'm aware of, I think actually what you're getting at is that you'd like it to be less of what it currently is, an adversarial relationship where you're always hoping your team is going to go after the umps. People loved that Aaron Boone rant when he was mad at the umpires, the savages in the box or whatever it was. Yeah. And that's how fans, I think, a lot want to see their team operate with the umps. And what you're saying is let the umps be the kind of, they are part of the show. They are running, they're conducting the show forward. It's not a third team on the field that you can fight whenever things aren't going well.
Well, and building off that, I think the umpires are bearing the brunt of across the board. Our ability to slow everything down and take screenshots and measure everything has made us want everything to be well, not to like abuse a word that people do in baseball discourse a lot, but like everything to be so optimized. But you're right. I think it would be more interesting if we treated umpires almost like baseball players. Like they're the best at their jobs and they should be evaluated, and perhaps some sort of evaluation system that involves like demotion would keep the worst umpires out of this. But right, I see what you're saying, that we need to shift the culture around umpires entirely to not view them as like machine features of the game that should run perfectly, and instead view them as the pinnacle of their own sport, which is umpiring, and they should be held to that standard, but not beyond it, and not expected to behave like machines. Because you're right, like it's, and that goes to your point about the sticky stuff, which is that like if we think they're really good at assessing sticky stuff, but I don't know that we do think that. But if they do think that,
I'm not sure
fine.
they are. Yeah,
like, you know what I mean? Like I think we need to get to a place where we're just like these like they're like managers or grounds crew people. They're almost more like grounds crew people. We love when the grounds crew people are really good at their jobs, but sometimes they're not good at their jobs, and then the pitchers like complain about the mound or whatever, and it's like, oh, maybe that place should get new grounds crew people. But right, it's like they should just be, we should expect them to be really good at their job, enjoy and appreciate when they are really good at their job, and then also be free to be like, I don't think that guy's very good at his job. We should maybe get a new one in here.
Yeah, the idea is not to say like, you know, we have to rally behind umpires at all points. They mess up and we can call them on it. But that doesn't mean, I feel like it often gets kind of metastasized to like, all of them are bad and they all need to go and we need to replace them with machines. And I understand the appeal. I was very, very, very ardently pro replay when it wasn't there. And, you know, now I'm like, I've seen it, and maybe it's just that I'm old, right? And I'm like, maybe we should go back to the human. No, but like, but I really wanted it. And I thought the idea is to get every call right. Like that is the threshold that we're trying to meet. Maybe we'll never get there, but we're trying to meet it. And I do think they're trying to. But now my point of view is honestly like, I don't know if we need to get every call right. Mm-hmm. Like I actually think like, it's not worth the time. There was I don't remember the game, but there was a challenge in like a 10-run game recently in the 9th inning. And it's like, guys, come on. Like, I think the umps should be able to be like, no, sorry. Like, this is not worth it for anybody. Please do not do that, you know? And yeah, I just think ultimately there's also, to your point about optimization, Hannah, I think it's not only optimizing like the umpires themselves, but teams are optimizing the ability to argue with and kind of, I don't want to go like too conspiratorial here, but like kind of like,
please do.
Like disvalue or devalue the trust in umpires to some degree, right? Like you want to, you know, it's like in basketball, they work the refs, like they want to work the umps, and they want to have them questioning, they want a makeup call, or they want this and that. And like they will argue with them and they will kind of try to subvert whenever they can. And that's certainly the case with sticky stuff and things like that. And, you know, again, the to me, that's not, like, I think we should be kind of on the side of people trying to make things, you know, fair for everyone, which isn't necessarily equal, but like fair for everyone, as opposed to like the teams that are trying to work the system as much as they possibly can. Again, like maybe Phil Cuzzi is I think you kind of hinted at it. Maybe he's the only one doing it right. Like maybe he's the only one willing to push people on this, and everyone else isn't. And teams are willing to take advantage of that. And we know they are, because like Rob Arthur at our site has talked about this. I know The Athletic has covered it. Like spin came back after the ban, right? It had a hard drop, and then it came back slowly, about half of what it was within a couple months, which means teams are taking advantage of either lax checks or something that umpires can't identify yet, right? And like, we shouldn't necessarily be mad at Phil Cuzzi for actually enforcing the rules that are there. Now, maybe he's a jerk about it. I'm willing to hear that out. I'm not saying he's the best, but I'm just saying like, we shouldn't necessarily be on the side of the teams trying to subvert these guys to their maximal benefit. And like this is, again, I don't mean to make it too broad, but like this is across sports. This is across society. Like Michael Lewis, obviously of Moneyball fame, had a whole podcast season about
Oh,
this,
yeah.
about working the refs against all odds. It's really good. I would recommend it. It's from sports to art to the courts to a variety of things. And I just think, that's kind of where I am on umpires. I think they're worth kind of not uniformly, not all the time getting behind, but kind of supporting in a broader sense.
And now is the time to do it, because ABS really is the final frontier in the sense that whatever we are not appreciating about umpires now, it is going to be too late to appreciate it if they implement ABS. I think MLB does understand the magnitude of that decision from the conversations that I've had with people there. They have gone out of their way to stress that far more than the rules they implemented this year, ABS is letting a cat out of a bag or opening a box that can't be
Pandora's
shut.
box.
Yeah,
Yes.
like that will change the game. We just talked about, before you came on, Greg, we just talked about all the ways that these rules have changed the games, and importantly, the fact that there kind of have been like no unintended consequences in some ways, that they really kind of all just like, that's what we thought it might do. ABS is not going to be like that. I think robo umps should be approached with extreme caution, because I don't think we have an appreciation, for the little ways in which umps call a slightly bigger strike zone when it's a position player pitching because the game's already out of hand. That there are all these things that we'll suddenly realize, like, shouldn't someone use some value judgment in this situation? It's like, well, robots don't do that.
Yeah, and this is why I think they will end up on another kind of challenge system that letting. I actually really like the one that they've implemented in the minors, where it's the player or the catcher or the pitcher, the batter, the catcher, or the pitcher has to call it, and it has to basically be immediate. And that lets the people involved in the play have the opportunity. There are enough of them that there aren't so many that you can waste them all the time, but there are enough of them that you can feel free to do it in an important moment. And they will let kind of non-important moments slide. It's just not that important sometimes. And I don't know if the people you've talked to, Hannah, have any sense of that, but I think that's kind of where they'll land. And even though I'm against a challenge system from the manager perspective on replay, I actually think it's really a good call to do with the strike zone. We see tennis do kind of or we did before it went completely Hawkeye, ironically enough. But like they had it took, I don't know, 10 seconds less to show the replay and to get the call, and everyone moved on, and it was really easy. And I just think in this situation that it makes the most sense to do. And we see with the manager system right now, they're enforcing a harder line on the 15-second. You have to call within 15 seconds. But I still hate that they're sitting there going, wait, give me my 15 seconds. I need to hear from a replay room. This is the goes back to the kind of thing about the pop-up slide in second base. Like, I think the manager should have to do it in like 3 seconds or move on. Like, either you think you had it or you don't, and like, make the call. Either then you can do replay and waste everybody's time potentially, or if it's really was too close to call, give the umpire the benefit of the doubt and like, let's keep this game moving. And so like, I think the immediacy of it is part of it. And they've had success kind of, especially this year, implementing new rules and kind of doing better on enforcing the ones that were already on the books. And I think we can just kind of take that further. And it does put more power in the hands of umpires, which I think people are uncomfortable with. But I guess my version of bandwagoning umpires is maybe don't be so uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, give them umpires the benefit of the doubt. That was a compelling bandwagon on a controversial subject that, I don't know, well, you did a good job. Craig, do you have anything you'd like to plug? Would you like to publicly compliment Zach? Because I know you worked with him even before I did, and I feel like, isn't this cool?
Yeah,
now he's here interviewing you on a podcast.
I would absolutely like to plug Zach Kreiser and his work, all his work, from Beyond the Box Score to Baseball Prospectus to Yahoo. I have a book over if you're watching this on a clip, I have a book over my shoulder, the Baseball Prospectus Annual, the 2023 version. Zach wrote honestly, one of my favorite essays in the entire book. There are a bunch of really good ones, so it's not only his, but it's up there, top 1 or 2 in the book, earnestly. So yeah, I would say, look, I know we're mid-season, the essays are timeless. though the stats might not be. But the comments are, the essays are great. So if you want to go buy that, that would be great. I would plug baseballprospectus.com, the site that I run. We run a bunch of articles every day. They're new, they're interesting. There's research, as I mentioned, like on spin rates and things like that. There's commentary, fantasy prospects, all of that kind of stuff. Everything you want out of a baseball site, I'd say we have it. So, sign up, give us a look.
And they've really cornered the market on certain things like spin rate, like the quality of the baseball year to year, that kind of thing. They are the trusted source for a lot of things that now have become normal topics of discourse season to season. So everybody
things that I reference, you can see there like a week earlier. That's kind of the idea.
Beat Zach to the punch by reading BP. All right. Thank you, Craig, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Craig.
All right, now I am going to talk about what we're watching this week, because even though it was like 3 seconds ago for you, Zach has left the chat. He had to run because he is going to Philly. He's going to see the Phillies Blue Jays in my hometown. That's fine. This week, while I stay here to watch first the A's and then the Rays take on the Yankees. I'm now talking to nobody. And Zach isn't here to stop me, say that like I'm so in on the Rays being like, I want them to just be the historically best team ever, wire to wire. And then I don't really care even what they do in the World Series. I'm just really enjoying watching them like continue to dominate and be at the top of every possible leaderboard. Okay, that's all we've got for you this week. Thanks again to Craig Goldstein for joining us. And make sure you catch everything we're writing from Philly for Zach, from New York for me. If the Cardinals stay a mess, perhaps I will go find them by following us both on Twitter. I am at Hannah R. Kaiser and he is at Z Kreiser. And if you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel where you can see the things that we say. This is a video medium or an audio medium. You can't see them, but you could if you were watching the YouTube feed. Leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, and we will be back next week with another episode of The Bandwagon.